Antarctica, a place where life struggles to exist, and death waits in silence. Imagine storms that howl at 100 kilometers an hour, waves the size of buildings, and ice so heavy it can crush a ship in seconds. Now imagine being trapped there, not for days, not for months, but for 2 long years. This isn't a movie. This is the true story of 28 men swallowed by the frozen jaws of Antarctica, in what the world would later call the greatest survival story of all time. Before we dive deeper into this chilling story, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the mysteries that await. The year was 1914. The world stood on the edge of war. But one man, Sir Ernest Shackleton, had his eyes fixed on a different battlefield, Antarctica. His dream was as dangerous as it was impossible to cross the frozen continent on foot, something no human had ever done. The mission was named the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition, and Shackleton knew it would demand everything: endurance, courage, and maybe even lives. To recruit his crew, Shackleton placed a chilling advertisement in the newspaper. Men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness. Safe return, doubtful. This wasn't a job posting. It was an invitation to dance with death. Yet, astonishingly, more than 100 men applied. In the end, Shackleton handpicked 27 of the bravest souls who would join him and unknowingly step into the darkest chapter of their lives. Their ship was named Endurance, a name that would come to define them. Built from the strongest oak, designed to withstand crushing ice, it was a hybrid vessel with both sails and an engine. On August 8, 1914, Endurance set sail from Plymouth, England. The voyage first carried them to Argentina, then to South Georgia Island for final preparations, and on December 5, 1914, they turned toward the most treacherous waters on Earth, the Weddell Sea. Aboard the ship were 28 men and 50 powerful dogs, trained to pull sledges across the frozen wilderness. Spirits were high, and the dream of glory burned bright. But just as Antarctica appeared within reach, nature struck its cruelest blow. On January 18, 1915, less than 130 kilometers from their destination, disaster came. The ship entered waters where the ice thickened into massive wallston, sometimes 18 feet deep. Endurance strained, but the frozen sea was merciless. The ship was trapped. Day after day, the men hacked at the ice, hauling the 300-ton vessel by sheer force. They fought with picks, shovels, and raw muscle, inching forward only a few hundred meters before exhaustion consumed them. It was hopeless. Shackleton made a grim decision. They would stop fighting and let the ship drift with the shifting ice, hoping that when spring came, the ice would break apart and set them free. Weeks turned into months. Endurance remained locked in her icy prison. The crew tried to hold on to routine. They played football on the ice, shared stories, even cut each other's hair to pass the time. Shackleton kept their spirits alive, insisting discipline and hope were as important as food. Yet beneath their smiles lurked the same thought: what if the ice never lets go? Then came April 1915. The ice began to shift, groaning under its own pressure. Mountains of ice heaved and collided, threatening to crush the ship. And on the night of July 14th, the silence shattered. A deafening crack echoed beneath them. Endurance lurched violently to one side. The men froze in terror. Was it a whale? Or was the ship finally losing its battle against the crushing grip of Antarctica? The crew rushed to the deck, their breath turning to ice in the freezing air as Endurance groaned like a wounded beast. Beneath them, the sea ice shifted and cracked, pushing against the ship's hull with unimaginable force. The rudder of the heart of the vessel was crushed, leaving them unable to steer even if they somehow broke free. 7 months had passed since they had last seen open water. Now, they were stranded, 2,000 kilometers from civilization, surrounded by nothing but endless white. Shackleton's men looked at him with fear in their eyes, but Shackleton never flinched. His voice was steady. "We will survive this, all of us." But deep inside, he knew the odds were vanishing by the hour. By October 1915, the ice's grip had tightened into a death sentence. On the night of the 27th, disaster struck with merciless fury. A massive surge of pressure slammed against the hull, tilting the Endurance 30 degrees in seconds. Timber groaned, splintered, and cracked as icy water began to seep through. The men scrambled with buckets, pumps, and anything they could find to stop the flood. For hours they fought the invading sea, their hands numb, their bodies frozen. But Shackleton saw the truth. The ship they had trusted with their lives was dying. With a heavy heart, he gave the order no sailor ever wants to hear: abandon ship. One by one, the men carried supplies onto the shifting ice: food, weapons, bedding, and 3 lifeboats. The dogs howled as they were dragged from the only shelter they knew. And then, before their eyes, the mighty Endurance groaned one last time and began to sink into the abyss, crushed by the unrelenting ice. For months, it had been their home, their shield against death. Now it was gone, swallowed by the frozen ocean. The men stood silently on the ice, watching the last fragments of wood disappear under the black water. They were no longer explorers, they were castaways, left at the mercy of Antarctica. Shackleton refused to let despair take root. He ordered the men to march toward Paulet Island, some 550 kilometers away, where he hoped supplies still remained. Dragging sledges loaded with gear and pushing their fragile lifeboats across the ice, they set out into the howling winds. Every step was torture. The ice cracked underfoot, threatening to swallow them whole. Some floes carried them adrift, only to split apart without warning, nearly plunging them into the freezing depths. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. Rations dwindled until a single biscuit had to last an entire day. To survive, they hunted penguins and seals, their blood freezing the moment it touched the snow. For 6 endless months they drifted across the ice, prisoners of the sea. Their beards grew wild, their bodies wasted, and frostbite blackened their skin. And yet Shackleton's iron will kept them moving. Finally, in April 1916, 13 months after Endurance had been trapped, they stumbled upon land, Elephant Island. For the first time in nearly 2 years, their boots touched solid ground. But their joy was short-lived. Elephant Island was a barren wasteland, battered by storms, offering no salvation. Supplies were nearly gone. If they stayed, death was certain. Shackleton faced the cruelest choice of his life. He could remain with his men and watch them starve, or risk everything on a desperate gamble. He chose the gamble. Taking 5 men, he prepared to set out in one of the lifeboats, across 1,300 kilometers of the world's deadliest seas, toward South Georgia Island, the only place where rescue might be possible. The others would remain behind, stranded and weak, praying Shackleton would return. And so, on April 24, 1916, 6 men pushed off into the roaring waves in a tiny boat, vanishing into the storm, while 22 others were left behind on a frozen, forsaken island, their fates hanging by a thread. The 6 men pushed their fragile lifeboat, the James Caird, into the monstrous waves of the Southern Ocean. At barely 22 feet long, it was little more than a coffin tossed upon the fury of the sea. Above them, the skies split open with snow and sleet, while below, icebergs drifted like silent killers. Shackleton, soaked to the bone, gripped the tiller, his jaw set like iron. He knew one truth: if they failed to reach South Georgia Island, not only would they perish, but the 22 men left behind on Elephant Island would be condemned to death. Failure was unthinkable. Survival was the only option. For 17 endless days, the tiny boat was battered by storms that could have swallowed a warship. Waves towered like black mountains, crashing over them with the roar of cannons. The men bailed water with frozen hands, their bodies stiffed with salt and cold. Sleep was impossible. Hunger gnawed at their insides. At night they saw no stars, only the black void of an endless storm. More than once, the James Caird nearly capsized, and the men clung desperately to the sides, waiting to be swallowed whole by the sea. Yet somehow, each time, the boat clawed its way back from the brink. Shackleton's voice, hoarse and unyielding, was the only anchor that kept them sane. "Hold on," he whispered. "For the men waiting for us, we cannot fail them." On May 10, 1916, like a mirage rising from the abyss, the mountains of South Georgia appeared on the horizon. Their bodies were broken, their eyes hollow, but Shackleton had done the impossible. Yet their torment was not over. The storm-racked coastline was too dangerous to land. They were forced to beach the boat on the far side of the island, cut off from the whaling station where salvation waited. Between them and safety lay a nightmare. 36 hours of climbing across jagged mountains, glaciers, and valleys that no human had ever crossed before. With no ropes, no maps, no equipment, Shackleton and 2 others set out on foot. Leaving the rest behind with the shattered boat, they climbed through freezing darkness, sliding down cliffs, hacking across ice fields, and pushing through snowstorms that blinded their path. Their boots froze solid, their hands bled from the ice, and every step threatened to be their last. But they moved with the desperation of men who carried not just their own lives, but the lives of their comrades on Elephant Island. At dawn on May 20th, 3 gaunt, frost-bitten figures stumbled into the whaling station at Stromness. Hardened sailors wept at the sight of them. Shackleton had made it, but there was no time for celebration. His men, 22 starving souls, still waited on Elephant Island. Over the next 3 months, Shackleton launched 4 rescue attempts, each beaten back by the relentless ice. Finally, on August 30th, 1916, a Chilean ship, the Yelcho, broke through the frozen waters. As it approached Elephant Island, gaunt figures rushed to the shore, their eyes wide with disbelief. Shackleton counted them, one by one, his heart pounding. Not one man was missing. Against every law of nature, all 28 men had survived. Their ordeal had lasted 634 days, nearly 2 years, trapped in the world's most merciless wilderness. They had lost their ship, their freedom, their strength, but not their will. Shackleton's name would be remembered not for reaching Antarctica, but for bringing every single man home alive. To this day, their journey remains one of the greatest survival stories ever told, a reminder that even in the coldest, darkest places on Earth, hope can burn brighter than death itself.